ask these questions. What kind of interventions move things forward? What are the aspects that make a difference? And which ones are universal across the world and which ones are context-specific? And how do you get that started? And here are the systems we looked at. All of the systems, if you look along the top there, had to meet the test of being significantly improved. The improvement had to be widespread and it had to be sustained over a period of years. And the ones in the top 13 all met that criteria. And then we wanted to spread it to pick up some countries in the developing world. And so we had a set of countries we called promising starts, where they didn't necessarily have the same international benchmarking data, but nevertheless there was clear evidence that over a sustained period they had significantly improved. So those were the 20 systems in the research study. Excuse me. And our sample represented systems like Singapore and Hong Kong that are among the very best in the world and keep getting better, but also Ghana and Chile down the bottom there, and Minas Gerais in Brazil, which from a low base have improved. So it's the first research sample to take a completely global perspective, including the developing and the developed world. And I'll come to the implications for Kentucky shortly. Again, proving the point, systems with very similar spend have a wide range of performance on funding. You can see the US over on the far right as you look at this in the good category. And we're talking in global reference terms here, but spending an awful lot of money to achieve the same performance as, for example, Germany or England, or even more than Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania. So it's not, as I say, about spending money, it's about spending the money well and effectively in the right places, in the right ways, and we can debate that. So what are the lessons? I'm just going to pull out 5 or 6 for the purposes of our discussion this afternoon. One is, if you get the right mix of policies, you put the right package together, the right combination, you can make progress from wherever your starting point is, and you can make it visibly and noticeably in a shorter time of 6 years. So a state like Kentucky, in fact, Kentucky did demonstrate that in the 1990s after the Kentucky Education Reform Act, and at different times has since. So it can be done. That's an optimistic message. Sometimes people reforming public education, particularly those looking at it from outside, despair. Is there one more silver bullet? You range from one. It's about a combination of policies applied systematically over a period of time. And what we were trying to tease out in the study is, what is that combination of policies? Just to demonstrate the point, these are improvements of a significant, statistically speaking, extent over a 6-year period. A poor system like Chile improving significantly. A fair to good system, Latvia, Saxony, one of the states of Germany that's was in the former East Germany, really making major gains. And then Hong Kong, already good but getting better. So whatever your initial performance, you can move forward with the right combination of policies. Moreover, as Singapore shows, if you do that, you can also narrow achievement gaps, which is a great concern in my country, and I know in yours, to narrow the achievement gaps between different ethnic and racial groups, but also between different economic groups. What you see in Singapore, people think of Singapore as a kind of homogeneous Chinese population, but actually there's Malay and Indian populations, significant minorities. And what you see here is that over a 25-year period, 20-year period, really significant narrowing of the achievement gaps between the Indians and Malays and the overall and the Chinese population. So raising performance in 6 years is possible, and you can do it in a way that narrows achievement gaps. Second lesson is what we teased out, and I think this is it's like an architect's sketch of a new understanding of global education systems, not yet a fully detailed set of drawings, but there's a set of interventions that work when you're going from poor to fair, but you need to change them as you go from fair to good and good to great and then great to excellent. So the policy set that works for Madhya Pradesh to get better won't be the same as the one that works for Hong Kong to get better. And one of the problems in the last 20 years is systems where they have tried to learn at all, where they have looked out, have tried to learn from the best handful of systems. But if your starting point is some way behind them, you might do the wrong things in trying to get like Finland or Singapore or Ontario. It's getting the right combination appropriate to the journey that you're on, or the stage of the journey you're on. So, and here I'm trying to summarize very ruthlessly, given the time. If you're on a poor to fair journey, one of the school systems I'm working with is Pakistan. There's a huge range of challenges, particularly acute education challenge. There's nothing they can learn immediately from how Singapore does education. What they can do is learn from how Singapore did education reform between 1965 and 1975. But basically, what you've got to do in Pakistan, and we're making progress with, is get the kids into school and make sure they learn the basics of literacy and numeracy, which means providing teachers with very scripted lessons, because they're low-capacity teachers. You've got to get the teachers to show up. You've got to give them clear teacher guides, clear textbooks, and then manage performance and check it through. We're also in Pakistan building an alternative to that, because as we try to improve the government system, we also know that improving the government system on its own won't be enough. So we're developing a voucher scheme. Pakistan will have the biggest scale-up of a voucher scheme in human history over the next 3 to 4 years. So the US has about 160,000 young people on voucher schemes. After 20 years of trying in Pakistan, they'll reach 400,000 in the next 4 years. And obviously we're working through all the details of how to make sure that system doesn't fall into the sort of corrupt practices that infect large parts of Pakistan's government system. But that's the poor to fair journey. And then you get on the fair to good journey. And now you're beginning to establish a teaching profession with common practice, with common standards. Now you're beginning to say, we want schools that are run like this. You're beginning to achieve that. And then you move on to the good to great. And here it's about shaping the professional. In the end, improving the performance of a school system is all about the quality of teaching. And the way to get from good to great and then great to excellent is not to just try and improve each individual teacher, but for the teachers collectively in a school and across a system to learn from each other in a really systematic way how to get better. It's about building collective capacity. So the longer you go on, the more it's about improving the quality of the teaching profession. It's an immediate and a very important issue for the US, for Kentucky, for all the other states in the Union. So here's an example of a poor to fair journey. Minas Gerais, the most improved province in Brazil, which has gone from being 5th best province to best province over a 4-year period. You see the rate of improvement. They did it by what I just described, giving teachers scripted lessons, training them to use those scripted lessons, managing performance, testing the children regularly, getting the data back, using that to reward success, intervening where things weren't working, and driving it forward. Great leadership from the governor of that province. And I've been through this, so I won't go through all the detail on that. And by the way, the slides are yours if anybody is interested in these. Long Beach, California, one of the small systems in our sample, but a really good example of improvement over a sustained period in the US, is a good to great story. This is just 5 years of improvement. Actually, they've only had 2 superintendents between 1991 and now, both outstanding educational leaders, both really focused on what they call the Long Beach way, both making sure that any teacher who comes in learns the pedagogy, the teaching and learning practices that they expect from any teacher in Long Beach. The same with the principals. So the induction system is good. Once you're in a school, there's processes inside the school where the teachers plan together, they learn from each other, they see the student work that their different teaching produces, and they're required or just expected. It doesn't need a kind of formal bureaucratic requirement. They're expected because that's how Long Beach is now, to continually address the challenges that the regular data and that their comparisons of student work bring up. And you see the progress. That's just over a 5-year period, but over a 20-year period, it's even more impressive. And so the good to great journey is about raising the caliber of people coming into the teaching. What do you expect of people entering the teaching profession? How do you make the teaching profession attractive to talented people with the right mix of academic and personal qualifications? Once you've got the people in the school system, it's about continuous improvement, just as it is in any large business organization. You see, there's data in the US that shows that teachers are recruited, they improve for the first 3 years, which is what you'd expect because you're learning how to do the job, and then their performance plateaus for the next 37 years, and then they retire. What kind of career is that? 37 years of plateauing performance. But these systems are getting their idea that getting this continuous improvement so that teachers are constantly doing a better job. So tomorrow's lesson is better than yesterday's, and that's true all the time. And it's because they aren't each individual teacher going into a classroom and shutting the door and hoping for the best. The way the school is organised enables them to learn in a systematic way from each other, and they're really fantastic at this in Shanghai, for example, or in Japan or in Singapore. The other thing you see is whatever stage you're at, there's a combination required of accountability and capability building. Both matter. Both are essential. But the more you move towards excellent, the less part accountability plays. It doesn't stop being important. It stays absolutely essential, but it's less of the driver of improvement. Whereas the driver of improvement over time becomes the quality of the teaching profession, that capability building, the collective capacity of the teachers in the system and the leaders in the system. So getting that balance of accountability and capability building is really, really important and actually fundamental to achieving the aspirations that you as a Chamber of Commerce have and that the education system has for the future of Kentucky. And here I'll just give some examples that I've already mentioned. The study groups that work sometimes get called professional learning communities. Here are 4 systems that are outstanding. Aspire is a US charter chain. Boston, Massachusetts did a wonderful job of this in the late 90s, early part of the last decade. Ontario and Canada, a marvellous improvement over the last 6 or 8 years as a result of great political leadership, really good strategy. And Hong Kong, where I'm heading later in the week, again, fantastic effort to get the teachers to learn in a really systematic way, not just a chat about teaching, but really systematically watching each other teach, planning together, thinking about it, looking at pupil work and learning from each other. So this is absolutely the driver of improvement in the best systems in the world. Which comes to the third lesson. Here I think we struggled with the words in the report here. Structure means things to do with the way the system is organised. Resource, I think, is relatively obvious. And process, we mean the things that are to do with the relationships between people, how they're managed, but also capability building, the way in which teachers teach, the way teachers relate to students. And what you find is that the thing that drives progress more and more as the system improves is what we called, in a rather clumsy word, process. We called those things about the human interactions in a system. But actually, I think great businesses know this, the quality of the relationships between the people, the skills of the people, the way the people learn, they're willing to develop as individuals as part of the company's progress. Really, once you get to a certain standard, is the driver of progress. So this is really important because often in the politics of education, the amount of money, the class size, the structure, these are the things that get debated. Should we have middle schools or not? Should we have fewer students in each class? These are the things that get debated, but the thing that's driving improvement is none of those. It's this stuff. I'm slightly exaggerating, but it is really important that great systems, or systems like Kentucky's, which if you look at it globally is a good system aspiring to be great. So not yet a great system aspiring to be excellent. It's a good system aspiring to be great. It's got to get into these process interventions. And we look at some of them here. This is just the evidence to make the point that I made. So when we looked at the range of interventions in the 20 systems we're talking about, it was the processes, the practices, the activities, the rights and responsibilities, people's clarity about what their role was, their capability to do the job, whether they were a school leader or a teacher. Those were the things that drove progress. Michael Fullan, who's quoted here, has written a recent paper called Wrong versus Right Drivers. He's emeritus professor at the University of Toronto and probably the leading writer about educational change around the world. And he slightly exaggerates here, but on the left, as you look at it, accountability, individual, technology, and piecemeal, he calls those the wrong drivers. He doesn't mean they're not important. I've actually challenged him on this in public debate. And I would put these in slightly different words, but I want to reflect his thought because the basic thought is right. He says, accountability is important, but to drive a system from good to great or great to excellent, it's the capability building that you've got to lead with. As far as the teachers are receiving it, they've got to see this is a big emphasis on developing their collective and individual capability. Similarly, working on each individual teacher is important, but the teamwork in the school and between schools is fundamental. Similarly, technology is absolutely vital to the future, but you need to lead with pedagogy, the teaching and learning, and how the technology can help teachers do teaching and students do learning, rather than leading with the technology. And finally, we know, I think we were guilty of this at times in the Blair administration when I was working for Tony Blair, piecemeal reform, a whole series of random initiatives, doesn't change anything. It's about combinations, it's about whole system reform, it's about strategy. So when Micheal talks about the right drivers, he's saying those are the things to emphasize and lead with, particularly when you're interacting with the education system. Not that the things in blue there aren't important, but it's a matter of emphasis, and I think worth bringing out in the debate, and we can debate that in a few minutes. I think your Commonwealth commitment that Terry has been leading across the state over the last few months is really, really important. I think getting the school districts to sign up to the statewide goals is really, really important. There's a sense of collective action on behalf of the state. I think Kentucky did wonderful things after the Kira back in 1990, and then it had a couple of difficult phases, but I think it's coming out of that now with a real drive towards improvement. I think the collective capacity that I've just been emphasizing in relation to Michael Fullen's findings will be fundamental on whether Kentucky can achieve those commitments that are made in the Commonwealth commitment. The investment in individual and collective capacity of teachers and school leaders, and indeed district change agents, will be fundamental. And then crucially, implementation. One of the things that wasn't mentioned in the introduction, but that I spent 4 years doing for the Blair administration, I was the Prime Minister's implementation advisor. My job was to make sure that his 20 big domestic policy priorities got delivered on time, on standard between 2001 and 2005. I learned a lot about implementation. We were at the time the first government in the world to have a unit that I led focused specifically on implementation. Because politicians love debating strategy, all the people around them love debating strategy and policy and initiatives and the media and all of that, and it's quite hard to get all that right, and it's very exciting to debate it all. But then they think when they've got it done that the job's over. But actually, it's only 10% over. The even more difficult thing is making it actually make a difference across a school system, across a healthcare system, or whatever system it is that you're working on. So getting the quality of implementation consistent and pursued through is absolutely vital. And again, in the great systems that are becoming excellent, you see this quality of implementation that just runs through the way they prepare policy and the way they implement it. And there's a lot that systems can do simply by improving the quality of implementation. One of the questions that we get asked a lot on the basis of this report is, well, isn't it a lot easier to do education improvement in Singapore and Korea than it is in the US or the UK? And the answer is, it probably is a lot easier. The context is an issue. I've heard Arnie Duncan say on a platform that when the president came back from Korea, the president had asked the president of Korea what was the biggest problem he faced, and he said the demand of parents for high-quality education was the biggest problem they faced in Korea. And Arnie says it will be a nice problem to have. So the context, the culture does make a difference. Over dinner in Seoul, the biggest debate is about how many hours homework your child does. And if it's less than 3 every evening, people are really looking down on you. So there is a cultural factor here. And also, the background makes a difference. When we were studying the former Soviet Empire countries like Slovenia or Latvia or Estonia, you mentioned the word target in a country like that, and they think Stalin. So the context, history matters, culture matters. Of course, these things matter. But what we found was that it doesn't matter quite as much as you might think. So if you take data, in Singapore, they don't like having targets because the pressure from parents for improvement is so great that they think if they miss a target, they'll be kind of slaughtered by the population. So they don't like targets, but they love data. So everybody needs good data systems, but how you use them is different. Whereas in the UK or the US and the Commonwealth commitment here, targets are a vital part of the improvement journey. But the underlying thing is everybody needs really good data that is applied back into the system to improve classroom, schools, local systems and national systems. Similarly, you can go through these various other debates. And one of the choices you have to make is, should you be persuading people, or should you be mandating people? And here are some of the factors you can take into account. How rapidly do you want to move? If you're under pressure to achieve visible improvement in the short term, maybe you need to mandate it. If not, maybe you should persuade it. In Hong Kong, they've spent 10 years implementing their education reform, and now it's finally beginning to go into place, and they hope to get great gains from that. Is it non-negotiable? If it's non-negotiable, if it's a major political commitment, not much point spending a long time persuading people, because you're going to do it anyway. Will there be stark winners and losers, and so on? So these are the kinds of decisions we saw people when they thought about mandating or persuading. But the core reform strategy was not context-specific. It was how you went about it that we saw as the big change. And then the final lesson I want to emphasize before going back to you for some questions is this. Leadership continuity is essential. It's really important. Ideally, the same leaders. In our sample, what you see here is our strategic leaders. They're the technical people, so not necessarily political leaders, but technical people, like I was in the Blair administration. On the whole, they were 6 years in office, but a US urban superintendent, the average is 2.8 years. Take the median of the political leaders in our sample systems was 7 years. An education secretary in England, 2 years. I've known 12 of them going back to 1986. I really thought the Blair administration was going to fix it, and our first education secretary stayed 4 years, and then as a result of a series of accidents, we got back onto the long-term historical trend in the second term, which was, to be honest, really lost pace. So this is a really critical thing. And if you can't keep the same political leader, then keeping the same strategy is vital. And keeping the same strategy depends on the people around the political system, and it depends crucially, especially in this country, on the quality of business leaders, the influence of the Chamber of Commerce, the influence in this state of the Pritchard Committee. So if you can't get the consistency into the political and technical leaders that will be the ideal, then the guiding coalition around the reform needs to provide that continuity. You can do that. That's a role you can play as Terry goes through the challenge of implementing the reforms that he's putting in place now. Your support, your encouragement through the dark moments, when things are going wrong, will be absolutely vital to getting the consistency. And there are 9 lessons in the report, and the summary of the report is on the desk in front of you. I want to finish by just saying a couple of things to wrap up. Implementation is 90%. I mentioned that. The overall lesson here is, through mandates, you can get systems to adequate, but to get them to be great, you can't do that. If you try and say the sentence, I'm going to mandate you to be great, it's impossible. The English language won't allow you to mandate greatness. You can mandate adequacy, you can't mandate greatness. You have to unleash it. So as Kentucky goes from good to great, the mandates can guarantee a high minimum standard, but it's the way you unleash greatness in the system that will determine whether you achieve great or excellent. And that's a different flavour of implementation. And it's a real challenge, because in Kentucky, as in England, as in most of the states in the US, although the average of the system is good and it's trying to get to great, actually you've got a big variation around the average. So you need to be doing some mandating with the underperforming high schools or the underperforming districts. But you also need to be doing some unleashing of the greatness, getting great school leaders who have room and autonomy to manage their schools, giving schools the ability to recruit students when they're demonstrating success, giving schools the room to manage themselves so that they can find the space to do the things that they believe in and respond to the demands and pressures of their community. And finally, it's a fascinating history, Kentucky's education system, and you might want to look back for historical purposes, but the future is in front of us. So don't look back, look forward, don't look down, because it's a bit scary, but look up, because the future is going to be very exciting. And finally, don't look inwards, as I know you aren't in this group, but look outwards, because Kentucky is trying to catch up with the US on higher education and K-12, and it will do that. But when it catches up with the US, it will find that the US is well behind the leadership of the rest of the world. So as Kentucky catches up with the US has got to catch up with the rest of the world, and the only way to do that is for all of us. By the way, the same is true in Britain. to keep looking out, to keep learning the lessons. And the people that learn the lessons of what's working and apply them rapidly, learn from that application faster and sustain the drive, they will be the people that win the future. And winning the future is about having high quality education, because the challenges I started describing at the beginning, none of them can be solved by education alone, but only with education as part of it can any of those problems be solved. Thank you very much for your time and attention.